soon as it streams through, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Celia, you've gone mute on me. Okay.
All right.
We're back on a different platform with Adam Eveland. It's still Randy and I, and it's still Celia on the ones and twos. So we are going to try this again. Hopefully we still have a attentive listening audience. All right, Adam, you gave us a history several times. We're going to try it this one last time, if you don't mind. Can you go back through it with us and just tell everybody, the last thing that we've really gotten to is that you said, basically the first question, you had joined the military when you were 17, you got your parents to give you consent, you went with them, you knew that you were gay at that point. Tell us the story. Tell us really kind of what occurred. I mean, people out there, I got to tell you, I can't imagine how scary that was.
Yeah.
You know, I think your story is going to really inspire some people to overcome some fears.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. When I joined the military, again, I was 17, right? So now thinking in hindsight, 10 years later, a lot of it was kind of through a 17-year-old's process. I wasn't really, I wasn't really thinking about the entire gambit of everything. I definitely went in naive to a couple of things. I certainly don't regret any of it by any means. When I joined when I was 17 years old, I was really gung-ho. I really wanted to do special forces, be a pararescueman, and like that's where my blinders were at. I really, really wanted to do that. Long story short, didn't get through that training. I failed out of that pipeline. In hindsight, again, doing that as a 17-year-old, not an excuse for not doing it by any means. I probably couldn't do it today, or give me the best time of my life to do it. It's incredibly difficult training. But that wasn't my focus. My focus is I wanted to join the military. I wanted to start my life. I wanted to, create something for myself, of myself. It wasn't until I was at my first studio location as a security force member. So for those who aren't familiar, that's like military police for the Air Force. That back in 2010, 2011, when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was in the dismantling process, that I really started to understand, like, wow, okay, I'm in this military and being gay is not okay in this context. And I think for a lot of times, as far as, how I succeeded professionally and rose through the ranks, and especially my formative years in the military, I was really pushing myself because I was afraid if someone found out that I was gay, that I would at least have my work ethic and my performance to fall back on, right? So I didn't want to give someone the space to say, like, hey, Eveland sucks for X, Y, and Z, or whatever, slurs sucks, it would be kind, because he's gay. At least they could say, like, well, he's a kick-ass airman, or he's really good at his job.
Yeah.
So with respect to that, what are some of the things that you did have to encounter? I mean, with the Don't Ask, Don't Tell, kind of theory, I guess, that was being employed at that point, were there people that knew? At some point, did they know? I mean, and if they did, were you scared? What was going through your mind? I mean, obviously, you're not some small guy that's subject to taking an ass whipping here and there, but at the same time, it's the sort of thing that, people hear horror stories about the military, whether it's boot camp or otherwise. I can't imagine this was something that didn't instill some sort of fear in you. How did you make it through that sort of thing?
So I think everyone's experiences are vastly different, right? So I can't speak to, gays at large or LGBT at large in the military, but from my experiences, certainly when it's being repealed, I had a great fear of being outed, especially when I was stationed in Korea at the time. I was there for 2 years. And there was a lot of sergeants that I really respected, that were my superiors in a law enforcement setting. And, of course, the kind of the nice thing about being gay or lesbian or bi, for the most part, is, it's sort of something that you can sort of keep under wraps if you need to, right? So it's this fear of people finding out or discovering, right? It's not like I just wear it out. Depending on who you ask, some people say, "Hey, he's gay."
I was being nice. I wouldn't say anything.
Right? Depending on your audience and how bad you're pushing it up. But certainly, I had a real fear of that because a lot of comments that that a lot of sergeants and superiors had made when they didn't think that a gay person was in the room. So that's what really, really made me dig down and try and just perform really well. But also, you know, that was one duty location, and I found that of my 5 PCSs, so permanent change of station, it's like when in the military they have to move you permanently to a new base or location. I had to go through that process every single time. It got easier as I got more senior in rank, and I stopped caring a lot more about what people thought. You know, when I was younger, I was really worried. But my second base, I was part of a unit that was like an SRT, so it's a special reaction team. So it's kind of like a different acronym for SWAT. Super gung ho, super like ultra masculine, whatever. Terrible. They unfortunately that unit had a couple of years of just terrible leadership rot. And there wasn't much really integrity at that point. This is after I don't know tell, but while I was in the selection process for this specialized unit, I was outed to some of my cadre, and that cadre in turn told the team that I was joining and the people that went through the process. And it certainly made it a lot harder. We would go through different shoot houses using what's called simulation. So it's simulated rounds. It's like basically paintballs that come out of your actual service weapon. And I was in the shoot house, and when we'd go through these exercises, we're learning how to be part of this close quarter combat unit and go through the house effectively. And our ultimate mission was to protect nuclear weapons, right? So it's a no-fail mission. It's very high stakes. But I'd go through these exercises, and at that point, after I was outed, the training kind of stopped. And it was more about just trying to mess me up as much as physically possible in a physical way. So whereas you get welts from that training, that's just part of it. But I would go home just covered in welts because people wouldn't honor my shots for a training mechanism. So they would stand up, and I would just get pelted all day long. I got slammed into some walls, got some rifle butts, to the face. Nothing serious, as far not long lasting. And when I saw it at that time, that was probably about 2013. At the time when I went to things like equal opportunity, being gay wasn't a protected class for EO. So like where it could be hazing or where it could be these other things. There wasn't really any recourse for me at that time. And I think, again, hindsight, being so junior in rank, I didn't really know how to appropriately address those things. So there's certain things like that.
My curiosity would be, even if there was recourse of some type, it would be the sort of thing that it would probably be difficult to complain about it on some level. I mean, was there situations where you're like, do I just take my licks? Do I do something about it? Do I quit? Do I go on? I mean, what went through your mind, and how did you address it?
So I had those exercises personally. I didn't have too many people at that point that I could confide in. But I definitely thought, I was like, hey, do I just quit, go back to doing whatever? And I really, really came to the conclusion. I was like, if I do that, they win, right? If they do it, they ran out some other fag or whatever it is. And to me, that would be like kind of like just retreat, like leaving with my tail between my legs. So I really devoted myself to making sure that I could be the best shot that I could be, to be as physically fit that I could be, to try and be better than them. And it wasn't to like belittle or be better than them. It's like, listen, I can do what you can do, and I can do it better. And again, kind of falling back on just work performance as sort of an outlet. It was interesting. It was a really terrible culture that it really took until 2 of my best friends till today on that team. They're like, hey, he's this normal guy. Let's go hang out. Let's invite me over to house barbecues. Just like little things like that. I had to pay I had to do my work up front where others wouldn't have to. But after they kind of accepted me in, that slowly started breaking some barriers down. Although they got accused of being gay as well for just being my friend. But again, that's just terrible cultures.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's to a certain level, I've been outed at every base that I've gone to, and the experience has always been different. I have friends and colleagues that are gay and out in the military, and they've never had any poor run-ins like that or anything to that effect. And certainly mine is not as bad as a lot of other people have had. So everyone has a different experience. I think that the good thing that came from that is on that base specifically, everyone knew about the gay guy who was on that unit because it was apparently a thing to talk about. So I had people reach out to me sort of, below the surface and say like, hey, I'm gay, or I'm struggling with this, or I've got other people who just hit me up on different social media platforms and like, hey, I'm gay. I'm thinking about joining, what are your thoughts? And I can always say like, well, this was my experience. I think it was worth it. I never regret it. As this is what I saw. This is personal to me, but as like at the end of the day, like screw them, just show up, be better.
Yeah, that's an interesting, I've thought about that too in my life, Adam, and there's this element of, I don't want to mean this in an insulting way, but there's almost this element of, for me, inadequacy of, I need to be better. I need to show them, I need to work harder than anybody works in order to prove myself. And it feels like for me, I'm, at this point in my life, I look back on my life and I see that sort of been a consistent pattern, not just that I see in myself, but in other gay men, right? We have these like, let's be the most fit, let's have the best body, let's have the best career, let's be the most successful, let's work the hardest. And I did you see that in other members of the military other than you that you knew that were gay? Like, did you see that pattern established in order for them to feel like they're on a level playing field, if not better?
Some, for me personally, some, as far as the LGBT community, but I actually saw that after I had gone through this experience. I actually quite regularly saw that experience in women or people of color, where it's a different type of hurdle, but sort of like the mechanism is somewhat similar. It's like, like I can't play on this, be on that team, right? Like I'm just going to try and be better or show my value, based off my work ethic. And again, there's always a balance to that, right? So that you can obsess over your work environment and your name, but then also that's starting to detract from your personal life. So it's a balance. But for gay military members, I haven't seen that so specifically, but I certainly saw that in a lot of female colleagues, and then minorities as well.
Yeah.
Adam, you had said that when it was the special reaction unit or special reaction team that you had discussed where you were outed, so to speak, to the balance of the unit and then the trickle down effect. How did he out you? Was it somebody you confided in that betrayed you? And I mean, I'm sorry if I'm getting personal. I'm just curious, I was always curious how that would have occurred, because one of the things that you had said is that there's a level of concealment that you can undertake, which I'm sure is something you did probably really well during boot camp, because I can't even imagine how that would have gone. That's actually a question I have too, but how did you get outed?
So at my previous base in Korea, by the time I was leaving, the National was repealed, so I couldn't get, fired or just for being gay at that point. And I had enough what I felt benefices to be out to a couple of people, right? And then whatever. And military is a very small, there's a lot of people, right? So I don't know what the exact number is now, but around somewhere north of 300,000 active duty members in the Air Force, right? That's a small community. And then even within that, like military police is even a smaller one. And there's all of these different subcultures within this subculture of the military. So I would imagine someone from my previous base told one of my cadre, or maybe they reached back. And then that had happened at my next follow-on location too after this one. I remember I was a military working dog handler for a time in Dover, and I remember in processing. And I showed up, I'm like, hey, excited to be here. My name's Sergeant Eveland, and the lady who did the in processing, she's like, oh, you're the new handler. And I'm like, yeah, I'm Sergeant Eveland, nice to meet you. She's like, oh no, you're the new gay handler. And I'm like, I just drove across country from Wyoming to over Delaware, and the first thing is like, I'm like, not that I'm Sergeant Eveland, I've got good work ethic, I'm just a gay handler. And that preceded by me even checking in my bags. So that was immediately kind of like a flashback to what I went through on that team, and I was like, I've just got to start all over again. That wasn't the case there in Dover. It isn't much more pleasant experience.
Yeah, I think you should have like played it out. I think you should have worn like really short shorts and like a dog tag and like no shirt. You should have told me.
I mean, it was almost just as bad, but that's a story for another time. But yeah, I mean, that continued for a while. And again, I think, so as I PCS to different locations, I always make sure it's like, hey, I'm going to take inventory of the environment when I get there. And, and I think Dover was a lot better because it wasn't as novel anymore at that point as 2014, so 3 years after. And there had already been LGBT members who had championed that location, or they normalized it. And that's the thing too, that's always been interesting in my career, right? Because, I've been a member of different organizations, and, a lot of people are like, oh, I'm a lot more accepting of you. You're not like those other gay people.
Yeah,
and, like I'm more digestible to them because
Sure. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's I talk about that, and Adam, you get it. I get it. Too. No funny comments, Mister. But I think that people don't sometimes necessarily have an issue with you being a minority, but they tend to point out if you act a certain stereotype.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, we're cool with you being gay, bro, but don't be walking around wearing a tutu kind of deal. Or we're cool with you being Hispanic but not have an accent. And I think that it's almost like just a different degree of racism or sexism or whatever we want to call it. But I also think that that's unfortunate because people have to be able to be authentic with themselves and who they are, right? And did you ever find yourself, because you're in the military, sort of having to push it up to protect yourself?
Oh, I mean, certainly. And again, that's kind of like taking inventory of the location, and it's sort of it's a double-edged sword, right? Even with the LGBT community too, right? Like they've got their own idea of how I should be, and then straight I'm like, hey, I'm just in the middle. Like I'm just gonna do me along the way. Other times where you can proverbially let down your hair, right? But yeah, no, absolutely. There's different times where you really try and like push it up or whatever. And I mean, my boyfriend and I always tease each other at the same time. When we answer our phones, our voices drop an octave, right? And we tease each other for that. But that's also like we also are so used to doing that, and it's sad, right? But I mean, that's just kind of how we adapted. So in those places where I've got colleagues that says like, hey, you're cool, right? You're not like one of the other ones. You're not as however they decide that I should be. I mean, it's a good place to start. Like I understand like they're coming from they're trying to say that I accept you, right? And that's good and that's valid, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, I was like that. I appreciate you appreciate how I am. However, even if I was super flamboyant, there'd be nothing wrong with that either. And then you kind of just bring along a journey and stuff like that, rather than just getting in the throat with it. It's just like let me show you my role. So
without it being conditioned on what is palatable to you, right?
Exactly.
Sort of like you said. Yeah, exactly. What year I don't think we've ever talked about this in our personal talk. What year did you come out? How old were you?
I came out. Sorry, it's like I came out when I was 19.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I was 19. I was in Korea still at that point. Like to some friends and people there, and then I came out to my mom when I was 19 as well. I called her from Korea, and I, came out to her and stuff like that. And she like really like the only thing that she was concerned about. She immediately she's like, oh well, how does that work in the military? Are you going to be okay?
Right.
So, I mean,
one thing I was curious about is you've discussed how it was somewhat personally stifling to your behavior, how you acted, some of those sorts of things. Do you think because it was personally stifling in terms of how you behaved in those things, that it was professionally stifling on your ability to perform as an active military member? In other words, do you think if you were allowed to be your true self, and I think you were for the most part, but my curiosity would be if it was so openly accepted the way it should be, do you think it would have been able to accelerate or improve your performance as a military personnel member?
I can't say that I've ever been held back. I can say that, especially in my younger years, in the military, I said my younger years in the military, right? The military is like this sliding scale of like what is old because 20 years and you're out. But I remember thinking like when I got certain awards before I was out, I felt so ashamed of myself because I was like, I don't think that they would give this to me if they knew that I was gay in this environment. But as far as progressing professionally, no, I have hit the marks. I'm very grateful. I've been extremely blessed with amazing mentors along the way. And that's been truly, I don't think I ever had like any like sort of institutional support. Not that I really looked for that, but I had amazing mentors along the way. I made every single rank, every first time, all the way through up until just leaving, and that's a very rare thing. So I can't say that I was stifled. I think that honestly, having that experience made me grow as a person and a professional, like personally and professionally. Along with like other things that like have nothing to do with being gay. Like I've lived 4 years in Asia, and I've had amazing perspective to go out and see different forms, especially working in law enforcement. I've been able to go and see how different countries' systems of government work in comparison to our own, and I do liaison with these counterparts and individuals. So I've been very lucky to have gone through the process that I have to both appreciate things that we have in our country, but then also to understand maybe we're not the best at.
Sure.
So I think that giving a different perspective, both being LGBT and then also getting the opportunity to serve in the military, I'm very blessed to have had that experience.
Sure.
You've experienced a lot, obviously, being a gay man in the military. Do you believe that the lack of wider acceptance in the military has inhibited some people from moving up in the ranks where they should have moved up in the ranks? Have you seen instances where it's still probably a veiled discriminatory practice at this point, but people are being held back because of their sexual orientation?
So I don't think,
whether it's known or unknown, I guess, for lack of a better way to say it.
Certainly. I don't think that I have the senior perspective at that level to really understand the internal politics. Like you're talking about like different stars of generals or different tiers of generals. Certainly we have representation there, a lot of representation, more than we've certainly obviously had before. And I don't know how that specifically affects those ranks. I can say for me as an enlisted person, I can't say it's ever held me back because I hit all my marks, but also I was part of a system that's a massive bureaucracy. So when you're in these large organizations, there's a lot of like, a lot of checks and balances on what is fairness, what is the system. There's a lot of thought to make sure that that's taken out of the system. At the senior levels, I couldn't comment on it because I just don't have a perspective. But at my level, in the enlisted tiers, making it to senior NCO or senior non-commissioned officer, I didn't experience that, fortunately.
How many other, I always wonder this, Adam, I think that there has to be a decent percentage of people in the military that are gay but are closeted. Would you venture to say that there is a decent amount? I mean, that you know of or that you suspect? It just seems, that's just the impression that I get, but it just seems like maybe it's the vernacular is still not one where it's just talked about.
I think there's certainly a lot. I mean, honestly, like the military, everyone thinks it's like you're pulling people from a certain part of the country, and to an extent that might be true. The military is just a representation of the total population. It's 1% of the population, and that's a massive amount of people. You're going to get people of all skin colors, all different backgrounds, all different economic bringings, all different sexual orientations. It's certainly there. I mean, there's different communities where it's certainly more prevalent than others. And again, like those are those subcultures within it. I can certainly say that at the time where I was going through military police and more of like an infantry type kind of organization, it was a lot less visible. But I think that has changed massively now. I never go to a base or another place where I don't meet another gay person, or I think it's almost as representative as your normal going about your life.
Population, yeah. If you had a son or a cousin or a nephew, and he's a teenager, and he says, I'm gay and I want to be in the military. Am I open and honest about it, or do I just keep it to myself? What's your advice to him?
I say do it. I say if that's what you want to do, if you want to serve your country, absolutely. You know, and again, and I'm not to sit, and I've had my experiences that weren't always positive, right? But that doesn't discount all the great ones that I had.
Sure.
I also think that going in under Don't Ask, Don't Tell at the time versus today, it's a totally different culture. You know, I think the military and just, you know, people in it in general understand the value of diversity, and not just the color of your skin, and not just whether or not you're gay, straight, bi, trans, whatever. It's diversity of thought, it's diversity of skill, diversity of like how you're brought up. That's one thing that I was so thankful for the last organization that I left with, is that they really, really embodied diversity, and again, in deeper senses of it. And it's actually cool when I would go to other, do liaison with other foreign government representatives. It's funny, like you're in Korea and you're sitting on a panel on the other side, and you know you've got a bunch of South Koreans, and they look over and they'd even comment, they're like, "Oh, you got people of all different things," and it's one of those things that you don't think about, right? It's kind of duh.
Sure.
Is Korean, you know, but when you kind of look in the mirror there, like you have a wealth of experience and a wealth of representation there, and I think that it is a huge strength. And I've had numerous examples in my career where, you know, I'm very thankful to have come from an organizational background that brings that to the table.
Yeah.
Is there anything in your military history that if you had it to do over again, knowing what you know now, that you do different?
Oh God, yeah, I wouldn't join at 17 years old and go straight into special forces, because that was that was painful. I mean, great experience. I learned so much about like how far I could physically push my body, how far, you know, what I could withstand. So I think with some better perspective of kind of where I wanted to go professionally, and that's a very personal thing where I want to go. You know, I would have done that differently, but knowing what I know today, you know, whatever struggles that I went through, and again, I say struggles lightly. You know, I've had a very, very great career. I would do it all over again. I would do it at 17 again, even. You know, there's been times where I'm like, God, I wish I had that college experience. You know, I was on like the 9-year plan for my undergrad, right? You know, but I'm very thankful for the experiences and the responsibility that I was able to work through at that time. So I would certainly do it again. I would go through a different career path though, but that's boring.
Favorite and least favorite place that you've been stationed at?
Texas, least favorite.
Yeah.
Well, you know, in San Antonio.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize how great San Diego was until I went to San Antonio. I'm just kidding. But favorite place. Probably maybe it's cop out, Dover, Delaware, just because I was so close to DC, my first community that I was ever really exposed to, because before that I was just this, you know, one gay kid figuring it out.
And DC is a good community. It is. A lot of good people. Yeah.
It's great. I was close to DC, I was close to Baltimore, I was close to Philly and New York, so that was cool. My least favorite place, and not to knock on it, probably Cheyenne, Wyoming, kind of on the flip side, right? Like it's just kind of, you know, is Wyoming's beautiful, but isn't that part where it's kind of got real?
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly. I mean, I loved my experiences living in Asia, though. Again, got to experience 2 years in South Korea, 2 years in Japan. Learned a lot. I definitely got at a certain level homesick, but those get like a special mention because I mean it was just so novel. I feel like I grew a lot from just living overseas and, you know, perspective building.
What are you going to miss the most?
Probably camaraderie. I can't even talk right now. Sorry.
We have a feed that's going, so we're good.
It's really cool being part of an organization where wherever you go, you immediately have a bunch of talking points and similar shared experiences, whether that's basic training, boot camp, military culture in general. And then I even love between the services how we all just like hate on each other constantly. Sort of like this infighting of a family. I'll certainly miss that. Although I'm happy to be leaving the military now. I made that decision because I want to really make some solid decisions on where I want to live. I was in for 10 years and I had 6 PCSs, so that was a lot. So,
Adam, tell us about your partner. You need to gloat about him a little bit.
my partner, so Kyle, he's incredible. He's a big old teddy bear. He's born and raised in New York State. He did 2 years, I think, at community college out there, and then he's just like, I'm moving to California. And he came out, and he's in law enforcement out here. And we met actually at National Police Week in DC years ago, right before I was moving to Japan. And we kind of clicked, and we're like, hey, I really like you. I really stoked on him. And then halfway through Japan, we kept on like kind of just taking vacations together. And I was like, I really like you. Like, let's date. Like, I want to make this happen.
Like club him over the head. Okay, let's go.
Yeah, never mind. Like, you're dating.
Yeah.
But it's incredible, just like incredibly supportive, understanding patient, partner, all of which I'm not. So good balancing. I'm kind of like, bouncing off the walls, and he's just kind of like that constant, just amazing, just patient person. So he's incredible.
What's it been like for him? You and I don't think we've talked about, or maybe we have a little bit, but his experience as a gay police officer. I mean, I would think that's somewhat analogous to what you had, sort of a very macho, testosterone laden culture, very aggressive. Like if there's any sign of weakness, like you don't want to be the omega in the group, right? So what's it been like for him?
I mean, we've had a lot of shared experiences to that. Again, like I said, when we catch each other answering the phone, we both drop that octave, right? So we're both guilty of it. He's had a very amazing career, a great career as well. He just promoted. I'm extremely proud of him. But yeah, he had similar situations where he'd go to a place and he was outed, well into his career at the point where he already had that name established for himself. And he never, from what I understand, never really kind of was a recipient to, naysayers or the slurs or whatever. But he'd always hear about it from this guy who worked on patrol with that guy and whatnot. And again, I think he's a very nonchalant person. You can't get him riled up. And, even if he did care or upset him, you'd never know because he's just there to do the job. So it's an interesting spot. Being a gay cop, and I know for a lot of my LGBT law enforcement friends that a lot of times you're stuck between worlds, and you're expected to be one way or the other, when you can lend experience and you can lend insight to both sides. So sometimes it's rock and a hard place, and sometimes it's thankless. But that's just how it is, I suppose. Currently.
No, I agree.
So
Yeah.
tell me this, what was the scariest moment from your military experience, if you want to do story time with us and explain something that you went through that was terribly frightening. Everybody always is curious. So
That's my dad that all the time, like that.
I never had like so there's a couple of frightening ones, I suppose. But I guess I'd qualify it with 2 because they're scary two different ways. The first, I used to be a K9 handler explosives, and I'd be an explosive detection dog working team. And when I was in Delaware, we kept on getting called to all these bomb threats at elementary schools and high schools, and people were calling all these threats, trying to blow up these schools. And I was on my first one. I hit the freeway, and I had my dog in the back, Cuervo, this amazing animal on the planet. And I was, booking it. I had cherries and berries, had lights on going down to it. And I called my supervisor at the time because I was the guy who was on duty. And I called him like, this is my first one. I'm like just off training. I was like, what do I do? And he's like, be fast and don't blow up. And I'm like, okay. And for my first one, it was like a very like, oh shit moment. And after my 10th 11th, 12th bomb. I'm just like, okay, cool. Like we're making sure that it's not here, and it
You're
just
like, I get it, I won't blow up. It's
yeah.
fine.
It's like I trust my dog, like whatever. I've got life insurance if I go out, whatever. So that was kind of like a pucker factor for sure. And then the second I was on a airfield in India, while India and Pakistan had started launching some missiles at each other. And it was definitely like, I'm like, okay, we need to pack our stuff and go. Like, it's not something that we were directly into, but it was definitely like, okay, these two powerful countries are about to go to war. Let's get our things and get the hell out of here.
Right. Wow.
So it was interesting.
Yeah. Wow. I think, do we have any questions, Elia? I think Adam, usually open it up the last few minutes for some people that may have questions.
Yes, we have questions. Our first question is from Kevin Juarez. Do you think that being a white male has shielded you from seeing different forms of discrimination, maybe sexism or racism, or even military predatory tactics?
Okay, so there's a couple things in there. Do I think it has shielded me? I think to an extent, yes, right? And it kind of goes back to the conversation earlier about, right, like no one can show up anywhere and hide their skin, right? I can show up and hide the fact that I'm gay to an extent. So yes, I think that I was certainly shielded. I've got a lot of, I remember when I was, I don't know, like 11, 12 years old, and my mother, and again, I didn't have the perspective at the time. My mom was like, you're so lucky to be a white boy born in this country at this time, right? And I'm like 12, so I don't have perspective as to what she means until later in my life that clicks, and I don't know why I remember that one offhanded conversation. Imagine she was pretty upset about something and she just told me. And but so kind of like the crux of that. Yes, I do believe I have been shielded. I have certain things, there are certain paths that have been open to me that are inherently more simple for me. And I recognize that. And being in those spaces where, right, like I've been in places where I've been discriminated against about something else other than the color of my skin or my sex, but my sexuality, I was certainly discriminated against. So while I don't understand certain struggles, I do, and I was given this question by one of my classmates when I was going through one of my academies. And he's like, I get the L, I get the G, I get the B, but I'm like this T, like this trans thing, like what is that? And I was just like, well, certainly I don't know the struggle of what it is to be trans. However, I do understand to be discriminated against specifically just for my sexuality, right? Again, that's not a race thing, it's different. But at least I was at least given perspective to sit there and be like, I've got it good in a lot of different ways. And I can understand and I can recognize, right, when women are working their asses off, just to be just as good or better, or they're actually working 10 times harder to be better than men rather than, just showing up and doing their job. So for that, I'm eternally grateful that I was given perspective and then to really kind of navigate those issues.
Yeah, that's very true.
Okay.
Got another one?
We have a comment from Jane Wild. She said, take my hat off for you for being brave and sharing your story. God bless.
We have a lot of people commenting on appreciating
you
sharing your story and for your service. We all appreciate it.
Yeah, Adam, I think, and like I told you from the beginning when I asked you this, we knew that we wanted someone, a service member, because again, I think the look of it from the outside is this very macho, almost sort of chauvinistic and tough, and there's sort of no space for vulnerability, right? And I think that you are. Thank you for being vulnerable with us and sharing the story. And when Patrick and his wife Nicolette approached me in late April, and they said, this is kind of what we want to do for Pride Month, and are you okay with that? And I'm like, absolutely, because I remember, 20, 25 years ago, there was when I was a teenager, there was never anyone that I said, oh, wow, this is a successful gay lawyer with a great life and blah, blah, blah. So I think that the more that we can add to that, the more it creates an environment and the temperature changes. So kids out there can say, you know what, I'm going to be okay. and it's going to be good. And, you know, it's because I think traditionally we've seen it in other industries like, right, beauty and fashion, and that's more accepting, that's more part of the culture. But then you get into stuff like, and lawyering is a little bit more liberal, but then you get into like banking and investment banking and professional sports and the military. And it's like, how much testosterone can we create in an environment? So she's right. Hats off to you. Thank you so much, my friend, for being here. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. I mean, and the thing I had a note earlier is just that, you know, me joining the military, when I did, sure, it was certainly under don't ask, don't tell, but I inherited a military and all the work where people already did that work for me. I had like a year and a half. So I didn't go through the thick of it. I inherited the good work that a lot of people did before, and I had a great career for it. So I take zero credit for any of that, but I mean, I'm very thankful. A lot of my mentors specifically worked on that issue. I'm eternally grateful for them. It was awesome, you know, seeing a lot of the speeches that I got to do. But I appreciate you guys having me on the show.
Yeah.
Oh, we really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. I mean, whether you're out or otherwise, you know, it takes a lot of courage to come up and explain things from your perspective and what you went through, and opening your mind to the rest of us is not always something easy to do, and we appreciate that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Adam. It was really nice to meet you.
Adam, thanks again, my friend.
Likewise.
Okay, we'll talk later.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.